Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookishrealm, and as you can see from the title of this video, today we are here to talk a little bit about the best and worst books that I've read so far in quarter one. If you hear a little bit of noise in the background, my little one is snacking right now. So, you know, as I said before, we film when we get the chance to film, and I have a chance to film now. And so I'm going to do it. So today I have a few books that I want to talk about quarter one. I don't have any stats for you because I've been doing a horrible job about keeping my stats because I ended up taking a break, and honestly I had a lot going on in the background, and so that wasn't my first priority. I probably will be better able to provide stats when we get closer to the middle point of the year, when everyone starts doing the mid-year book freakout tag. And when I do that, I probably will have some stats for you. But just to kind of give you an idea of how hard it was for me to actually do this video, I've read somewhere along the range of like 260 books so far this year. A lot of that has to do with the fact that I have been reading and tracking my picture book reads this year, and so that number is high. Now, I have had more hits than misses because on this list, I have 9 books that I consider to be best of, and 6 books that did not really make it for me at all. Like, just did not make the cut. They were not great. So we're gonna start by doing the worst first, and then we will finish by doing the best. As always, remember, if you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications. All right, so we're going to start with the worst of, and the first one that I have on this list is one that I've talked about extensively. I've actually talked about all of these books except maybe the picture books on my channel already. I have to play catch up with my wrap-ups. I caught up, and then National Library Week happened, so that kind of it didn't throw me off, but I wanted to focus on National Library Week, and so I primarily did that. And then probably starting next week, I will cover everything that I have read since that last weekly wrap-up that I did. And I will link all of the ones that I have done down in the description box below. So the first one being Go Ask Alice. I talked about this extensively in one of my videos. I was reading this one for a project that I'm still currently working on, and it is a young adult book that was published in the 70s, and it is a scare tactic of a book, y'all. I mean, literally, we are following a main character who gets involved in some substance issues, and it leads down a dark path that makes absolutely no sense. I think that the portrayal of individuals that have mental illness was highly inappropriate. I think that it doesn't provide any type of resources, and I also think that there wasn't any good parental involvement in this at all. It also wasn't really it wasn't written greatly, and all of it's a lie. So basically, the author was a psychiatrist or psychologist who claimed that this was from the experiences of like a diary of a real person, and they were not. They were all made up, which is super unfortunate because it's written, like, it says, oh, Go Ask Alice is written by anonymous. It's not an anonymous person, it's Beatrice Sparks, and I think that she did a disservice. There are definitely authors nowadays that are doing a better job of capturing those hard experiences that teens do go through. This is one that I just could not in good faith recommend. I think if you want to read it to get a better idea of what teen fiction was like in the 70s, it's good for that, but as far as like recommending to a teen to pick up, that's not where I would go with that. All right, the next one that I have is Midnight by Amy McCullough. This was an adult thriller that I had picked up this year because I have been trying to create some type of equal balance between the adult books that I'm reading in comparison to the children, young adult books that I've been picking up and the middle grade books that I've been picking up. But Midnight, the premise behind this one was really, really interesting. It is a kind of closed door thriller where we have a main character who is married to this he's not an art curator per se, but he does a lot of art dealings. He represents this specific artist that is known for painting these elaborate portraits of Antarctica, and unfortunately he dies, and in his death he
Sorry, I'm trying to straighten this up.
I got you. And unfortunately, in that time period, what ends up happening is he passes away, and then his artwork, of course, skyrockets and is selling for lots and lots of money. And so her boyfriend decides that he is going to have this midnight cruise expedition to Antarctica, and they're supposed to sell the artwork while they're on this cruise. Unfortunately, when she gets on the cruise ship, naturally her partner never shows up, so something happens to him, and then all of these weird things start happening to her, and she feels like someone is trying to attack her. Now, I thought that this could have been an opportunity to have some really exciting and thrilling things going on, considering that we are trapped on a cruise ship. However, this faltered a lot for me in the fact that it was extremely slow and boring, and I think with thrillers you have to be very, very careful about the pacing. And this one was not good with pacing whatsoever. I got about 150 pages into this book and it felt like absolutely nothing had happened. I think the author did a great job explaining like the scenery of Antarctica and its beauty and how dangerous it is, and you know, it looks beautiful on the outside, but it's extremely dangerous to go on an expedition to Antarctica. But at the end of the day, that wasn't enough to save the novel, because I wasn't reading the book to learn more about Antarctica, to be honest with you. I was reading the book to get the thrilling aspect of it, to figure out like what happened and who's trying to kill a main character. It just didn't work, y'all. It just was not as well written as I expected. I will say that the author brought a lot of her own experience and knowledge about Antarctica to the table, and it added a different flair to the book, something that I hadn't seen before, but I think that this could have been executed a lot better. The next one that I have is a beginner reader, which is not typical for me to include stuff like this on the list, but Here Comes Redbird is a DC mashup with Simon & Schuster, and they did a beginner reader that features all of the like well-known DC characters and has these cars at the center. And I thought it would be really cool because I have a little one that is interested in cars and stuff like that. But unfortunately, this was poorly made. The artwork was absolutely atrocious in this, and I was very surprised that they even agreed to put something like this on the market. It was horrendous. There's not really much to say about it, but I thought that the execution of it and the quality of it were so poor that I couldn't even rate it high. The next one that I have is So Let Them Burn, and this one wasn't, I won't say it's the worst book, but this was a disappointing read for me because So Let Them Burn is the first book in a series, and it is a Jamaican inspired fantasy book that features dragons. And I was amped for this because there's been so much buzz about books like Fourth Wing, and I don't think that Fourth Wing was good at all. And so I was excited to get another dragon book with a more diverse world, with a background that I was familiar with because my dad's side of the family is Jamaican. And so I was like, okay, this could be really, really fun. The reason why this book was a disappointment to me and not necessarily the worst book is that it is a debut book. And so it reads very much so like a debut book. However, I think that two of the main issues that I had with this book were the fact that this is supposed to be a Jamaican inspired fantasy world, right? I wanted Cole to dive deeper into the world itself, and there were these constant references to the use of patois, and we would hear things like, oh, this character spoke in patois, this character spoke in patois, and there was a good kind of introductory analysis about colonialism and how it would impact language. However, I think that sometimes it's easy to write in a way that's palatable to wide audiences because of a fear of immersing them too much into the culture to the point that they just won't understand it. But I always say that it is not your job to make things palatable all the time, that you have to trust your readers to be able to do the work. And so as someone who comes from a Jamaican background reading this book, I just felt like there wasn't enough Jamaica in the book. And I know you're saying, oh, actually it's Jamaican inspired. But if you're going to include these elements, like I want you to go all the way in and just go shoot for it. And I don't feel like that was done enough. I also felt like this world wasn't fleshed out enough. I couldn't tell whether this was a world that was taking place in the past, if it was a futuristic world. I couldn't tell if it was a modern world because the descriptions were pretty much all over the place. And so there was never any set clarity on what this world was and I wasn't looking necessarily for a specific time period, but it just felt like there were so many different elements that you couldn't pinpoint a time period even if you wanted to. I also think that one thing I struggled with is that the war that takes place prior to this book is a huge catalyst for how our characters move throughout the course of the entire novel. But because we don't get enough of this, enough information, I would say, or enough description, enough analysis of the war that happened before, it almost leaves you feeling as though you're missing a chunk of information, which unfortunately I think sometimes it's not necessary, but in this case where it is the catalyst for how our two main characters are moving throughout the course of the novel, how they interact with people, this whole relationship to the dragons, it's super important. And so I felt like we were only given a glimpse of what it was, and maybe we'll get more explanation and more understanding of that war come the second book. But I felt like for an entry level, this is where you lay the groundwork, or not even entry level, but for your first book in a series, this is where you lay the groundwork out, where you do a lot of explaining things and showing us this world, this lush world that you're creating, and then we delve into the nitty-gritty as we get through the course of the series. But I felt like there was a lot of basic groundwork that was not laid to make me feel that I was super engaged with this book and super confident and wanting to even dive into the rest of the series. The last two that I have are picture books, and it's really unfortunate that I have to even include picture books on this, but one was for marketing reasons and it was poorly written, and one is known for, it's an author who has a track record, and I didn't realize this because I hadn't read their previous picture book, but they have a track record for their depictions of Black characters, and I didn't really particularly care for it. So the first one is How to Catch a Mamasaurus, which is a part of that How to Catch picture book series. This one was a money grab, okay? There literally was nothing about this in terms of how it would be connected to the other series, like them actually going out to catch and be invested in catching a Mamasaurus. This was something that they threw together very quickly because it's a popular series, and you know, with Mother's Day being in May, it was a perfect time to release a book that people could purchase for Mother's Day and give to family members. Unfortunately, I didn't care for it. I thought it was poorly done, poorly executed, and quite frankly, it is a waste of your money. So if you were thinking about getting this one as a Mother's Day gift, I would definitely reconsider. The next one that I have is Like You, Like Me, and this one is essentially about two girls who are living in Africa, but they live in two different areas, one more city-like, one more rural. And granted, it is the white character that lives in a more rural area, and it is the Black child that lives in a more city aspect of the area. However, it is the depiction, and I don't even know how to explain it. Like, this is one of those picture books where you just have to read it to understand where I'm coming from. There was this depiction of the Black character that I just did not like, and going through reviews, like, I felt icky when I read it, and then going through other people's reviews, it made me, I felt vindicated in other people's responses to this book. And then I had found someone's review who had even stated that the previous book to this one also contained some problematic elements in her depiction of Black children, and so I was very shocked that no one in any publishing house picked up on that and thought like maybe this is not such a great idea that we publish this, but go off, I guess. All right, y'all, so let's go ahead and hop into the ones that I consider to be the best of quarter one so far. Now, these are definitely ones that have potential to be the best books of 2024. That can definitely change. We still have, you know, 3/4 of the year left, and I have already read some stuff this month, April, that could potentially knock some of this stuff out of their positions. But so far, these were ones that I really enjoyed. So the first one is Across the Many Seas. This is one that I've recently talked about by Ruth Behar. She is one of my favorite authors. I think the first time that I came in contact with Ruth Behar was when she published her book Letters from Cuba, and I learned a little bit about the connection between Cuba and the Jewish community, and I didn't really know a lot about that. Across the Many Seas is her newest historical fiction middle grade book that actually captures the experience of four members of a family, but through different generations. It starts in 1492 during the Spanish Inquisition, where the Sephardic Jewish community was asked basically to leave, or to, if they didn't leave, then they, you know, would get KILLED. Just, you know, got a little one in the room, so I'm just trying to be mindful. And we follow that family as they move to Turkey, just as Turkey is getting liberated, and we enter a new generation there. We watch that generation of the family then get transported to Cuba, and then we go from Cuba to Miami. This was very well done. It was really interesting kind of engaging with the author's note of this one and learning that Letters from Cuba was really a close analysis of the experiences of her mother's side of the family, and that this one was more so based on the experiences of her father's side of the family. I think this one did a great job just looking at the idea of intersectionality, of being Latina and being Jewish, and how it's impacted her family, and how people often associate 1492 with Christopher Columbus and often forget about the Spanish Inquisition and what that would have meant for the Sephardic Jewish community. I think this book was also super pleasant for, or not pleasant, I mean it was pleasant in some aspects, but not all of it was pleasant. I think this was super personal for me because my great-great-great-grandfather was a Sephardic Jew, and so there is some interesting connections that I was able to make after talking with some family members. I also think this book does a great job highlighting different events in history and how they impact their families. So we're looking at like the Spanish Inquisition, and then the independence of Turkey, and then we look at in Cuba when Fidel Castro takes power, and when we get to just Miami, we're seeing everything kind of get tied together. So once again, Ruth Behar never seems to fail me. I absolutely adore her as an author. She just does such amazing and wonderful things. The next one that I have is one that I've talked about continuously, and that is Most Ardently. This is part of the remix series that's been coming out by Gabe Cole Novoa. Not just Gabe Cole Novoa, but Gabe Cole Novoa wrote this one. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. Pride and Prejudice is one of my favorite Jane Austens. It's not my favorite Jane Austen. That is Sense and Sensibility, but I really do like it. I've seen all the adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, and so I was interested in seeing what Gabe Cole Novoa was going to do with this, considering that our main character is a trans man, and how they were going to incorporate that into this time period and into the framework that was Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. I think that Gabe did a wonderful job, not only just sticking to the source material, but adding their own spin and twist to it and making the story really their own. I think that one of the things that I wanted them to do a little bit more is explore the relationship that our characters had. Like, I really wanted them to really explore that relationship more in depth, because I think we get to this point where it's building, and then I wanted Gabe to kind of veer off into their own path and explore that relationship more. But other than that, like, Most Ardently was a pleasant, joyous book to read, and I really loved it. The next one I have is Part of Your World. Y'all know I like almost cried when I reviewed this book because I absolutely love Part of Your World. It was an unexpected book. I was going through a very rough time, and I had heard so many people talk about Abby Jimenez, and I was not the one that was going to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to get on the Abby Jimenez train, but I just thought, you know, I keep hearing people talk about it, let me just try it out. I did not expect what I got out of that book. I don't know if I was thinking I was getting like a cute, fluffy contemporary romance, whatever the case may be, but that was a deep book that really dives into this whole concept of found family and what it means when you have to learn to follow your own path and make decisions for yourself, because our heroine comes from a legacy of very well-known doctors. They run this hospital. It is dedicated to them essentially. They run this gala every single year, and so they're just a well-established family, all of them medical profession, and her parents really want her to follow a certain path, more so her father than anything. And she was supposed to be getting married to this other doctor, but he was not great to her at all. He was not great to her. And, you know, Abby Jimenez explores seeing the relationship dynamics between her parents really impacted how she handled her relationship. So she tries to get away, and she tries to kind of live her life her own way. She ends up meeting our hero, and what was originally just supposed to be kind of like an offhanded, you know, like I'm just trying to have some fun type of situation, ends up delving into something that's a little bit deeper, and it's very emotional. And I think it was very emotional for me specifically because of the fact that I needed that book at that time. There's always that one book, and it happens to me every single year. There's always that one book that comes to me when I need it because I'm specifically going through something, and that book ultimately makes me feel seen. And there were a lot of different quotes in this book that definitely speak to found family and following your own path and following your heart, and sometimes realizing that those relationships with those people that you consider blood may not be relationships that you can maintain anymore because of the fact that you have to find your own strength, your courage, independence, and know what it's like to be loved correctly. And so that was a huge deal for me. I definitely do not see anything knocking Part of Your World out of my top books for the year because it was just so brilliantly done. The next one that I have is Oath and Honor. I did not think that this was going to be up here. I had been waiting to read Oath and Honor by Liz Cheney since last year, and I waited a while to get access to the audio version to listen to Liz read it. This is probably a book that I would recommend everyone picking up at this time because we are in the midst of an election year, and I think that Liz Cheney does a wonderful job laying out what's at stake here. And I'm not saying, I'm not going to get into, you know, the options that we have now because I've already talked about how I don't feel comfortable with either one, and that's my just personal opinion. That's how I feel. And I think that Liz Cheney just points out the harm that has been done, specifically in relationship to January 6th and the Trump administration, and the things that happened during the insurrection and the trials that have followed, and how the Republican Party has turned into a complete mess. And I think that was her focus when she's talking about how it shifted and how it's changed and how it's not really the Republican Party that it used to be. And don't get me wrong, Liz Cheney and I fundamentally would not agree upon anything. She is a hardcore Constitution Republican. Like, there are some things that we definitely would disagree upon, not necessarily in terms of the Constitution, but how she views what should be a legal right and what should not be a legal right, and, you know, government involvement, lack of government involvement. Like, there's just some things that we, in terms of policies and stuff like that, we just wouldn't agree on. However, this book, I do agree that it's amazing to see that people still don't view the insurrection as an insurrection. They don't see it as treason. They don't see it as a problem. And that is the most harmful thing when you have someone who is effectively trying to overthrow the Constitution to maintain a certain level of power. That is dangerous. That is dangerous. I'm not a fan of the Founding Fathers. I have my issues with each one of them. However, if you're disrupting this in a way where it does not benefit the people and you're doing it for self-gratification, we have a serious issue on our hands. And so it makes me very, very nervous for the election in November, but it is what it is. I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I do think that this was an enjoyable read for me, and it's one of my, you know, many picks of political nonfiction that I'll be diving into this year. Next three that I have are all picture books. One is an informational picture book, which just means that it's nonfiction, is particularly a biography. The first one I have is I Live Inside a Whale. This one, I love the artwork in this, and unfortunately the author is not from the United States, or else I would tell you right now that this book would effectively be a Caldecott buzz for me. Like, this would, I think that this one would be up for a medal or a nominee, but because the author is not from the United States, I believe they're from Canada, they cannot be considered for a Caldecott, which is super unfortunate. But this one is about a little girl who does not like to socialize that much. It's almost like kind of a nod to social anxiety and wanting to be alone and to be in quiet spaces. And she ends up meeting this friend who recognizes the ability, or recognizes her need to want to coexist with people in quiet spaces and just kind of hang out and not be pressured to constantly engage, constantly talk, constantly have to make noise. Like, that's just not her as a person. And so it was nice that she was able to find a friend that understood that and encouraged her to be able to kind of come out of her shell a little bit when she felt ready and comfortable to do so. The artwork in this is phenomenal. I felt like part of it was done in color pencil, but I couldn't really tell. But if you ever have the chance to see the artwork for this one, I highly, highly, highly recommend checking it out. The artwork for the next one was also really, really amazing, but I liked the different, or shall I say, I like the paralleling of two stories that we kind of have going on in this one, and it's called A Flicker of Hope. This is about a family where the father leaves and migrates for work and comes home after the season is finished, and it coincides with the migration patterns of monarch butterflies. I'm starting to see a lot more picture books come out that are in reference to monarch butterflies and their migration patterns and conservation. There's a lot of conservation picture books coming out, as we are at the point where there is no turning back. There is no stopping global warming at this point. It is only trying to slow it down as much as possible, but we're inevitably there. And I liked that we were having these two paralleling stories. So the same way that we were looking at the monarchs migrate, we were looking at her father being absent and then coming home, and the artwork in this was just absolutely gorgeous. It was beautiful storytelling, beautiful artwork. I definitely think that this one may be up for an award at some point next year. I don't know. I still have 3/4 of a year worth of picture books to read, and so this one is high on the list for me and ones that could potentially be an award. I don't know if it'll get the Pura Belpra, but it's kind of feeling like it may, or maybe a nominee, but it was so well done. The next one that I have is an informational picture book, and this one is a biography of Augusta Baker, and this is Go Forth and Tell. This specifically focuses on the legacy of Augusta Baker, who was very, very well known in the library world, and goodness gracious, I love this book. It was so beautiful. The artwork in this was so beautiful. If you don't know anything about her, she was a children's librarian for New York Public Library, and eventually she gets I forget what the position was technically called, but it was at the University of South Carolina, and because she was so well known for her storytelling abilities and the importance of being able to tell stories to children, she is widely celebrated for her storytelling skills and her emphasis on how important it is to people of all ages, and there's lots of celebrations that go on to honor her. This one just recently came out, and as a matter of fact, the week that this is coming out is a week that people typically are honoring Augusta Baker, especially in South Carolina. So if you've never heard anything about her before, definitely check this one out. It warmed my heart to read this because it was just so well done and so lovely illustrated. The next one that I have is a middle grade book, and I don't know, I can't say that this is, it's kind of hard. This is one that's kind of hard because Sherry she kind of slapped me in the face with this one. And I talked about this one before because this was a very disturbing middle grade book. I would not recommend this one for middle grade readers that are more sensitive, because it's a lot of content in this one that is just not, it's not easy to read, and it follows a main character who is living with her sister and her brother, and her mom literally has just gotten custody of them back because she is battling alcoholism, and this is kind of like her last chance. And so she's hoping, the main character is hoping, that she finally gets it right, that her mother will finally get her life back on track. And of course, throughout the course of the novel, you see that this is just not happening. She's also very verbally and emotionally abusive to her. The mother is to the child. And she wants to join this dance, and I think it's a baton team. She wants to join, and her mother is just not kind about it because her mother wants to live her life instead of taking care of the kids. And her brother has fetal alcohol syndrome because of her mother's issues. It's just a lot, and unfortunately she ends up going through a whole lot, where we have a situation in particular that will always stand out to me, where there is an adult that fails her and doesn't protect her, and it absolutely broke my heart. And this is one of those books that doesn't have a sweet ending. It's kind of one of those, this is where it is in this moment right now. It is a tough book. It is a hard book. It is a realistic book in the fact that there are kids who are experiencing this, going in and out of the foster care system, dealing with a parent who is not capable of taking care of them, and then having to deal with the consequences if you're taking away this parent is telling you, you need to say this, you need to say that, so I can get, I can get you back. Knowing that that environment is not really safe for you, and having to make a very adult situation as a kid. Having to decide, like, I'm not going to have your back on this because you don't do right by me and my siblings. It was beautifully written. There was a lot of research that was done into this, but my goodness gracious, I do not take this lightly. There are a lot of content warnings to this one. I list them all in my Goodreads reviews, so definitely check that out if you're interested. The last one that I have on my list for this is a young adult book, and it's called Dead Girls Don't Say Sorry. This was a surprise for me. I actually had picked it up because I've been trying to keep up with as many young adult releases as possible as well, and this one caught me by surprise. This follows a main character who's recently lost her best friend. You don't really know how she's lost her best friend until the end of the book. Like, that's the whole purpose of it, is that the whole story comes full circle at the end of the book and you understand what exactly happened. But it's told in flashbacks and in the present time, where we're learning about the dynamics of their relationship and why she almost feels this relief of her best friend no longer being on this earth. And so at first it's kind of jarring because it's like, yo, that's kind of harsh. And it's not a mystery or a thriller, so it's definitely a realistic fiction contemporary book. So I'm thinking like, what's going on with the main character that she would feel, you know, almost relieved at not having to deal with her best friend anymore. But as you work your way through the novel, and especially those pieces that are the flashbacks, you quickly learn why. This one is a good example of seeing a toxic and abusive relationship that is not from a romantic standpoint or familial standpoint. It's from a friendship, a platonic friendship, and that these things can exist where you can have friendships that are manipulative, that are unhealthy, that are not right for you. And I like seeing teen books like this because I think whenever people think of those terms, manipulation and toxic, we often associate that with romantic, or we associate that with familial, and we don't really consider that you can have a platonic relationship with somebody who is your best friend and they are not healthy for you to be around. And I think a lot of times we don't learn that until we get older. For me, I didn't know that until I got older. And it's not fun being in a situation where you have someone who you know is just really not a good friend. They're not a healthy friend, and they are manipulative. They're often conniving, deceiving, they lie, they manipulate situations. And when I tell you, the girl who is no longer living in this book, the way she treats the main character is wild. As you go through it, it's almost like it's an onion. I hate to make a Shrek reference here, but it has layers. So it's very surface level at first, but as you peel back each layer, you learn more about the dynamic of their relationship and why she would feel like, oh my gosh, I'm finally free. I can relax. I don't have to stress about being in this friendship anymore. It was well written. It was like somber and dark, and it's something that I think teens could connect to. A lot of times when I read YA books, I'm looking for the connectability between the book and a teen audience, not the connectability between myself and the book. Sometimes it does happen, often because it reminds me of past experiences that I've gone through. So there's almost like this sense of nostalgia for me, or things that I wish I would have had as a teenager growing up. But for the most part, I'm looking at whether this book would have appeal or would serve as a good point of reference for a teen audience. And this is one of those books that does do that. I think that it does bring forth some topics to the table that we don't often consider or talk about in a broader sense. I wish that I could pinpoint more young adult titles that do this. Wild as it is now, it's kind of hard for me to do that. So this was definitely a standout read for me, and I really did enjoy that. All right, y'all, so in the comments down below, let me know what some of your favorite books were and most disappointing or worst books were of quarter 1. As always, like I said before, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. And if you're looking for ways to support the channel, or follow me on social media, all those links will be down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon.
You're unaware, keep moving like the scars aren't even there. It's in the air like a